Mrs. Sheridan's voice floated down the stairs. "Tell her to wear that sweet hat she had on last Sunday." "Mother says you're to wear that sweet hat you had on last Sunday." "Good. 1:00. Bye-bye." Laura put back the receiver, flung her arms over her head, took a deep breath, stretched and let them fall. "Ah," she sighed, and the moment after the sigh she sat up quickly. She was still listening. All the doors in the house seemed to be open. The house was alive with soft, quick steps and running voices. The green baize door that led to the kitchen regions swung open and shut with a muffled thud. And now there came a long, chuckling, absurd sound. It was the heavy piano being moved on its stiff casters. But the air! If you stopped to notice, was the air always like this? Little faint winds were playing chase, in at the top of the windows, out at the doors. And there were 2 tiny spots of sun, one on the inkpot, one on a silver photograph frame, playing too. Darling little spots, especially the one on the inkpot lid. It was quite warm, a warm little silver star. She could have kissed it. The front door bell pealed, and there sounded the rustle of Sadie's print skirt on the stairs. A man's voice murmured. Sadie answered, careless. "Sure, I don't know. Wait, I'll ask Mrs. Sheridan." "What is it, Sadie?" Laura came into the hall. "It's the florist, Miss Laura." It was indeed. There, just inside the door, stood a wide, shallow tray full of pots of pink lilies. No other kind. Nothing but lilies, canna lilies, big pink flowers, wide open, radiant, almost frighteningly alive on bright crimson stems. "Oh, Sadie," said Laura, and the sound was like a little moan. She crouched down as if to warm herself at that blaze of lilies. She felt they were in her fingers, on her lips, growing in her breast. "It's some mistake," she said faintly. "Nobody ever ordered so many. Sadie, go and find Mother." But at that moment Mrs. Sheridan joined them. "It's quite right," she said calmly. "Yes, I ordered them. Aren't they lovely?" She pressed Laura's arm. "I was passing the shop yesterday and I saw them in the window, and I suddenly thought, for once in my life, I shall have enough canna lilies. The garden party will be a good excuse." "But I thought you said you didn't mean to interfere," said Laura. Sadie had gone. The florist's man was still outside at his van. She put her arm around her mother's neck, and gently, very gently, she bit her mother's ear. "My darling child, you wouldn't like a logical mother, would you? Don't do that. Here's the man." He carried more lilies still, another whole tray. "Bank them up just inside the door, on both sides of the porch, please," said Mrs. Sheridan. "Don't you agree, Laura?" "Oh, I do, Mother." In the drawing room, Meg, Josie, and good little Hans had at last succeeded in moving the piano. "Now, if we put this Chesterfield against the wall and move everything out of the room except the chairs, don't you think?" "Quite. Hans, move these tables into the smoking room and bring a sweeper to take these marks off the carpet, and one moment, Hans." Josie loved giving orders to the servants, and they loved obeying her. She always made them feel they were taking part in some drama. "Tell Mother and Miss Laura to come here at once." "Very good, Miss Josie." She turned to Meg. "I want to hear what the piano sounds like, just in case I'm asked to sing this afternoon. Let's try over 'This Life is Weary.'" Poom! Ta-ta-ta! Tee-ta! The piano burst out so passionately that Josie's face changed. She clasped her hands. She looked mournfully and enigmatically at her mother and Laura as they came in. "This life is weary, a tear, a sigh, a love that changes. This love is weary, a tear, a sigh, a love that changes, and then goodbye." But at the word goodbye, and although the piano sounded more desperate than ever, her face broke into a brilliant, dreadfully unsympathetic smile. "Aren't I in good voice, Mummy?" she beamed. "This life is weary, hope comes to die. A dream awakening. But now Sadie interrupted them. What is it, Sadie? If you please, Mum. Cook says, have you got the flags for the sandwiches? The flags for the sandwiches, Sadie, echoed Mrs. Sheridan dreamily, and the children knew by her face that she hadn't got them. Let me see. And she said to Sadie firmly, tell Cook I'll let her have them in 10 minutes. Sadie went. Now, Laura, said her mother quickly, come with me into the smoking room. I've got the names somewhere on the back of an envelope. You will have to write them out for me. Meg, go upstairs this minute and take that wet thing off your head. Josie, run and finish dressing this instant. Do you hear me, children, or shall I have to tell your father when he comes home tonight? And Josie, pacify Cook if you do go into the kitchen, will you? I'm terrified of her this morning. The envelope was found at last behind the dining-room clock, though how it had got there Mrs. Sheridan could not imagine. One of you children must have stolen it out of my bag, because I remember vividly cream, cheese and lemon curd. Have you done that? Yes. Egg and... Mrs. Sheridan held the envelope away from her. It looks like mice. It can't be mice, can it? Olive, pet, said Laura, looking over her shoulder. Yes, of course, olive. What a horrible combination it sounds. Egg and olive. They were finished at last, and Laura took them off to the kitchen. She found Josie there pacifying the cook, who did not look at all terrifying. I've never seen such exquisite sandwiches, said Josie's rapturous voice. How many kinds did you say there were, Cook? 15? 15, Miss Josie. Well, Cook, I congratulate you. Cook swept up crusts with the long sandwich knife and smiled broadly. Godbuzz come, announced Sadie, issuing out of the pantry. She had seen the man pass the window. That meant the cream puffs had come. Godbuzz were famous for their cream puffs. Nobody ever thought of making them at home. Bring them in and put them on the table, my girl, ordered Cook. Sadie brought them in and went back to the door. Of course, Laura and Josie were far too grown up to really care about such things. All the same, they couldn't help agreeing that the puffs looked very attractive. Very. Cook began arranging them, shaking off the extra icing sugar. Don't they carry one back to all one's parties? Said Laura. I suppose they do, said practical Josie, who never liked to be carried back. They look beautifully light and feathery, I must say. Have one each, my dears, said Cook in her comfortable voice. Your ma won't know. Oh, impossible. Fancy cream puffs so soon after breakfast. The very idea made one shudder. All the same, 2 minutes later, Josie and Laura were licking their fingers with that absorbed inward look that only comes from whipped cream. Let's go into the garden out by the back way, suggested Laura. I want to see how the men are getting on with the marquee. They're such awfully nice men. But the back door was blocked by Cook, Sadie, Godber's man, and Hans. Something had happened. Tuk, 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 clucked Cook like an agitated hen. Sadie had her hand clapped to her cheek as though she had toothache. Hans' face was screwed up in the effort to understand. Only Godber's man seemed to be enjoying himself. It was his story. What's the matter? What's happened? There's been a horrible accident, said Cook. A man killed. A man killed? Where? How? When? But Godber's man wasn't going to have his story snatched from under his very nose. Know those little cottages just below here, miss? Know them? Of course she knew them. Well, there's a young chap living there, name of Scott, a carter. His horse shied at a traction engine, corner of Hawk Street this morning, and he was thrown out on the back of his head, killed. Dead? Laura stared at Godber's man. Dead when they picked him up, said Godber's man with relish. They were taking the body home as I come up here. And he said to the cook, he's left a wife and 5 little ones. Josie, come here. Laura caught hold of her sister's sleeve and dragged her through the kitchen to the other side of the green baize door. There she paused and leaned against it. Josie, she said, horrified, however are we going to stop everything? Stop everything, Laura? Cried Josie in astonishment. What do you mean? Stop the garden party, of course. Why did Josie pretend? But Josie was still more amazed. "Stop the garden party? My dear Laura, don't be so absurd. Of course we can't do anything of the kind. Nobody expects us to. Don't be so extravagant." "But we can't possibly have a garden party with a man dead just outside the front gate." That really was extravagant, for the little cottages were in a lane to themselves, at the very bottom of a steep rise that led up to the house. A broad road ran between. True, they were far too near. They were the greatest possible eyesore, and they had no right to be in that neighbourhood at all. They were little mean dwellings, painted a chocolate brown. In the garden patches there was nothing but cabbage stalks, sick hens, and tomato cans. The very smoke coming out of their chimneys was poverty-stricken. Little rags and shreds of smoke, so unlike the great silvery plumes that uncurled from the Sheridans' chimneys. Washerwomen lived in the lane, and sweeps, and a cobbler, and a man whose house front was studded all over with minute bird cages. Children swarmed. When the Sheridans were little, they were forbidden to set foot there because of the revolting language and of what they might catch. But since they were grown up, Laura and Laurie on their prowls sometimes walked through. It was disgusting and sordid. They came out with a shudder. But still, one must go everywhere. One must see everything. So through they went. "Just think of what the band would sound like to that poor woman," said Laura. "Oh, Laura!" Josie began to be seriously annoyed. "If you're going to stop a band playing every time someone has an accident, you'll lead a very strenuous life. I'm every bit as sorry about it as you. I feel just as sympathetic." Her eyes hardened. She looked at her sister just as she used to when they were little and fighting together. "You won't bring a drunken workman back to life by being sentimental," she said softly. "Drunk? Who said he was drunk?" Laura turned furiously on Josie. She said, just as they used to say on those occasions, "I'm going straight up to tell Mother." "Do, dear," cooed Josie. "Mother, can I come into your room?" Laura turned the big glass doorknob. "Of course, child. Why, what's the matter? What's given you such a colour?" And Mrs. Sheridan turned round from her dressing table. She was trying on a new hat. "Mother, a man's been killed," began Laura. "Not in the garden," interrupted her mother. "No, no. Oh, what a fright you gave me." Mrs. Sheridan sighed with relief and took off the big hat and held it on her knee.